Hazelden offers a wide range of residential and outpatient addiction and mental health services for adults and youth. Lifelong recovery is possible through treatment with Hazelden, even for people whose life has become totally unmanageable because of alcohol or drugs. A confidential assessment by a licensed addiction professional is available at 1-800-I-DO-CARE or online at hazelden.org. Hazelden, treating addiction, transforming lives.
And hello, I'm Rochelle Grossman, and this is Your Voice, our WGCU broadcast where we take a week-long in-depth look at an issue on television, radio, and our website, and then you become part of the program. We invite you to call 1-800-809-WGCU, that's 9428, at any time during this live broadcast to have your voice heard. You can also send us an email. The address is yourvoice@wgcu.org. We're on Facebook, WGCU Public Media, and if you Twitter, send us a tweet at WGCU. The issue tonight, amendments. We're taking it a step beyond the candidates because on Tuesday you'll have a total of 6 amendments to the Florida State Constitution to vote on. Do you even know what they are? Do you know what they all mean? We're here to help. We've assembled a team of experts to help break down Florida's changing constitution. Please welcome Dr. Sandra Pavelka, Associate Professor in the Division of Public Affairs and Director of the Institute for Youth and Justice Studies at Florida Gulf Coast University. David Plazis is the Community Conversation Editor at the News Press and has been listening to the issues that matter to you. Dr. Peter Bergerson is a political expert and also a professor of public affairs at Florida Gulf Coast University. And let's welcome Lydia Galton, the president of the Collier County chapter of the League of Women Voters. Her organization recently hosted a public forum to help educate you on these amendments. Well, good evening to you panelists.
Good evening. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate you all being here. And you know, Lydia, I think I'd like to start with you because we were just talking before this broadcast. You were surprised at just how many people showed up to learn about these amendments in the public forum.
I was surprised when we had our forum on the amendments. We had about 550 people, as far as we can count, come to find out about them. They are confusing, they're difficult, it's hard to understand them.
And that's why we're having a show like we are today.
Exactly.
Well, as you know, the amendments are those important issues at the end of the ballot, and we've got some important ones this time around. Dr. Pavelka, I think we've been there on Election Day. I can speak for myself saying, I'm not sure if I 100% understand these amendments. Do you find that to be the case as well?
I do, and even for Dr. Bergerson and I, who are political science professors, it's hard for us to even understand them at times. But I think it's really important for our voters to be educated on these issues, on these amendments, and really to use their best judgment in going out to vote and making their vote count on Election Day.
David, how much traction are you hearing from the public? You're getting a lot of readership interest and people interested in commenting on the process, on the amendments?
We definitely are, and probably the most popular amendment or the most controversial amendment 4, which we'll be talking about later, related to land use changes, et cetera. And we're getting a lot of concerns. What does it mean? You know, we can't understand this language, it's legalese. And there's the other concern too about just what do they do? How are they implemented? And why are we repealing or amending an amendment, which we'll be talking about as well in just a moment.
Certainly, and Dr. Bergerson, I'd like to bring you in as well, because do you think people just might be a little confused?
I think so, no question about it. There have extremely long ballot, at least in some people's mind, voting for a governor, voting for the Senate, and then when you get down to these amendments, and you know, for a casual voter or casual reader, trying to understand what these amendments are going to do, particularly 2 of them, which we'll get into, this becomes a challenge. A couple of them are pretty straightforward and perhaps easy to grasp, but 2 or 3 of them present difficulty.
Well, of course, this Tuesday, voters will exercise their power of direct democracy by choosing the future of 6 proposals. Here now is a brief look for you.
Amendment 1 deals with the public financing of political campaigns. Amendment 1 would repeal or overturn the public financing requirement approved by voters in 1998. A yes vote here ends taxpayer financing of political campaigns. Amendment number 2 is called the Homestead ad valorem tax credit for deployed military personnel. A yes vote would compensate servicemen and women by giving them a tax break for their overseas duties. Amendment 4 is dubbed Hometown Democracy. Its sponsors say voter approval gives citizens oversight control over how their communities grow. People against it dub it the Vote on Everything Amendment and argue it would lead to wasted tax dollars and endless litigation, since voters already elect community representatives to make these kinds of land planning decisions for them. Amendments 5 and 6 deal with gerrymandering, the redrawing of election district boundaries. The near-identical amendments set criteria for drawing legislative and congressional districts, forbidding state lawmakers to favor or handicap incumbent members of political parties. The amendment calls for lawmakers to map out areas in such a way that political parties and minorities get an equal opportunity to take part in the political process. Opposers argue the amendments will result in court fights over redistricting. Finally, a yes vote for Amendment 8 would revise the public school class size caps set forth by voters in 2002. Amendment 8 would calculate class size based on school-wide averages, while at the same time adopt new limits on the maximum number of students assigned to each public school teacher. A no vote keeps the 2002 class size caps in place.
Of course, Amendment 8 is a big issue for parents and for taxpayers. It revises the current amendment, placing hard caps on class size in favor of those school-wide averages. David, let me talk to you about this a little bit. You recently hosted an education forum taking a closer look at these and other important issues. Any talk of class size during that forum, and how do you weigh in on it?
Sure. In the forum overall, while we didn't address that particular issue, we did address the issue of school financing, and I've talked to superintendents about this who generally support an amendment of the amendment. They want to see more flexibility because it's been so costly. Just in Lee County alone over the last couple of years, $1 billion has been spent on building new schools, and it came at the worst time during the boom time when land was so expensive. One of the arguments, the counter-arguments to amending the amendment is that somehow you do get flexibility according to the courts. And what this will do will take the limits that will be put in place in 2011, that is 18 students per classroom K through 3, 22 in 4 through 8, and 25 in high school, and change those essentially respectively to, I believe, 21, 27, and 30. Right. While we don't have definitive arguments, or at least I haven't seen any definitive studies that class size makes that much of a difference. This is one of the arguments from superintendents. Teachers are saying, wait a second, it's about class size management, and it's also about fulfilling a promise that was made 8 years ago to the voters.
And we're going to hear from one of those teachers coming up in a story I've done. Dr. Pavelka, as a professor, talk to me a little bit about class size. Do you think size matters?
I absolutely think that if you're increasing the number of students by any means, that is going to matter to a teacher, to a professor. And in these cases, we're talking K through 12, so classroom management is definitely an issue, especially at those younger ages. And certainly a smaller class is more manageable. The student-teacher ratio is an important issue.
Certainly.
Now with this regard, we are looking at also averaging class sizes, not just the number, but averaging. And so that's a little bit of a different take than the way the amendment was written originally under the proposed change.
Sure. Back in 2002. Lydia, I'd like to bring you in on this as well, because the League of Women Voters has taken no position on this repeal of the original amendment, but it opposed the original amendment back in 2002.
Because we don't believe that an amendment like this belongs in the Constitution.
Good point.
Class size is not something that a Constitution needs to deal with.
Very interesting. Dr. Bergerson, would you like to comment?
Well, I would just support what Liddy just said regarding this public policy issue should be set by the state legislature and not by the Constitution, in my mind. But the direct issue, I think, class size does make a difference, particularly today where you have a lot of classes and the diversity of students. In other words, if you had 21 or 25 or 30 students and it was a homogeneous group of students,
the same level,
well, then you would be able to deal with it as a whole. With smaller groups, a small number of, say, 18, and you have some readers, non-readers, you have a cross-section, then you have to deal with the skill level. Sure. And so there's some real issues here.
The hard claps, too, though, put administrators in a very challenging position, and our mission tonight is to fairly present both sides, and we'd like to give you a look right now.
Opening the window to the world of learning is something Pinewoods elementary teacher Sarah Kohlhoff is passionate about.
It is a calling. There is nothing as wonderful as watching kids learn.
For Sarah, keeping class sizes small means more learning and less policing, teaching kids how to behave in a class packed with peers.
I believe you're going to have to spend a lot of time, however, on making sure that you're creating an environment, teaming kids, teaching them how to behave in large crowds, taking turns. There's going to have to be a lot of upfront. A lot of upfront is fine. It can eventually maximize learning time, but you're still talking about instructional time. You only have 180 days.
As a fourth grade teacher, Kohlhoff does not support Amendment Number 8. Sponsored by the Florida Legislature, it asks voters to revise the 2002 amendment limiting class size that went into effect this school year, mandating hard caps. A maximum of 18 students in grades pre-K through 3rd grade, a total of 22 students for grades 4 through 8, and 25 students max in grades 9 through 12. The revision would allow administrators to use a school-wide average to calculate the number of students assigned.
As a teacher, I would definitely not vote in favor of changing the amendment at this time. I don't believe in politicizing children's learning, and I think that's what's going on.
Like Kohlhoff, Mark Castellano, president of the Teachers Association of Lee County, agrees. He says revising what voters already supported in 2002 is the wrong decision.
Ultimately, I have decided I'm going to vote no on Amendment 8, and I'm going to encourage other people to vote no on Amendment 8, because I believe that the way this is done has been very much a symptom of what's wrong with politics in Tallahassee.
Castellano argues that the legislature is trying to trick voters by refusing to fund the final phase of class size reduction.
I believe it is politics, and it bothers me. It scares me that we keep playing politics with our students. Right now, they are constitutionally mandated to fund the class size per student. They have to provide that funding. It changes the language, so they're going to be allowed to fund it based on school averages. So now you're talking averages versus real numbers. Guess what that translates into? Reduced funding.
As the law now reads, some pretty hard caps are placed on class size. Any new student coming or leaving a district could create a logistical and financial nightmare for districts. Former Lee County Superintendent James Browder explains.
It's K3, 18-1. New child comes in, it's the 19th student. If you carry that to the extreme, you would immediately, during the year, have to stop, split the class up, and have another teacher hired. What we're saying is that the flexibility inside of that would give us an opportunity to still stay at the average. And it would mean that there would be less disruption inside of the school for parents and students. We have 40% mobility, so youngsters move around all the time. That would create havoc inside of our elementary, middle, and high schools.
Cape Coral's Trafalgar Middle School principal Angela Pruitt agrees. She supports Amendment 8, revising the class size requirement for public schools.
I definitely support it just because I believe in the big picture, allowing schools and administrators to have the flexibility when necessary. Is what's in the best interest for kids and for teachers. Because even with the revision, there still is a cap. It's 27.
27 would be the new cap for grades 4 through 8, 21 students max for pre-K through grade 3, and 30 for high school. And while Pruitt says she supports smaller class sizes, school administrators need the flexibility to adjust numbers according to needs.
The thing that scares me the most is that if it doesn't pass, by the time parents really understand the impact of it, it's going to be too late. When I make it personal, what if it's your child that doesn't get to have French and you want it? What if it's your child that needs advanced math and I can't offer it? I can see where that can affect me personally. On the other side of it, as a taxpayer, it just makes sense to support it.
To date, Florida has spent $13 billion on class size cap implementation, and some say the cost is simply too great in today's economy. As for Pinewood's teacher, Sarah Kohlhoff,
the best thing to do is to get information. I think that somehow we've sort of forgotten that it's your duty as a voter to be informed. So go to the websites that give you the information. There are specific websites that are in support of the amendment and not in support of the amendment. Go to both. Read what people have to say. And then, yeah, you're going to have to make kind of an informed decision.
I love what she says there. Kind of do the research yourself, and then ultimately you decide how you feel on these issues. And speaking of you, this is your voice. We want to remind you that we are live, and now is the chance for you to voice your opinion on these amendments. The show is called Florida's Changing Constitution. We're talking about the amendments, and at any time during this live broadcast, feel free to call 1-800-809-WGCU. You just saw the address listed on your screen there. Also, feel free to email us. The address is yourvoice@wgcu.org. And then you can also use our Facebook page to leave a comment. Or if you Twitter or tweet, send us one at WGCU. Well, the political reality we have here in Florida is that Florida's Constitution is always changing. As you've just heard in the amendment piece on education, this kind of back and forth isn't uncommon. For example, in 2000, voters passed a high-speed ground transportation amendment. It passed only to be repealed 4 years later in 2004 because it was too costly to build. Now here we are in 2010 and we're talking about it again as President Obama earmarked stimulus dollars to fund the project. We alluded to this a little bit, but let's bring it back again. Dr. Pavelka, some argue that maybe we need to really take a good look at how Florida changes the Constitution.
Absolutely, and I think in terms of forecasting and envisioning where Florida's going, where our future is really important, and I think the voters see that. However, the economic realities, the fiscal realities of it, sometimes we're faced with, and things change.
David, do you see that sometimes citizen-driven amendments perhaps may have either a noble cause behind them, but unfortunately maybe the process to fund these mandates just isn't either well thought out or the economic reality changes?
I think there is passion behind each of these amendments. The one difficulty with them is that they're trying to re-engineer social policy sometimes, whether it's with same-sex marriage issues that was passed in 2008, or barring pregnant pigs from being crated, for example, in 2002. You know, these are things that that we would consider inappropriate for the Constitution. However, the counter-argument is that this is the citizens' Constitution, and the Florida Constitution gives us the right to amend in the silliest ways how we govern ourselves.
This might be a good time to kind of educate you a little bit, because every state has rules and procedures that govern how its constitution can be amended. In Florida, there are more ways to change our document than in any other state. There were a total of 5. The first, of course, is through the legislature. This is the most common method whereby lawmakers can pass a joint resolution supported by 3/5 of both the House and the Senate. The second way to get a law on the books is by the citizens' initiative process, often dubbed direct democracy. Everyday people have the ability to change the Constitution, like we were talking about, provided they collect the necessary signatures and meet the requirements. The next method of change is by calling for a constitutional convention. The fourth method comes from Florida's Constitution Revision Commission, group of 37 appointed men and women who meet every 20 years to review the Constitution and propose any changes. Finally, the fifth way to amend our Constitution is through the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission. This group convenes every 20 years, and the timing is synced with the Revision Commission so that one presents amendments every 10 years. So the question becomes, Is this direct democracy in action? And Dr. Bergerson, I guess I'd like to get your opinion on just how you feel about how all of this is. Is it just too easy, whereby it's still important that citizens have that ability to voice their concerns?
I don't think it's too easy. In fact, the legislature 2 years ago, I think it was, or maybe 4 now, I guess, increased the percentage needed to pass a constitutional amendment from 50% to 60%. And subsequently that is going to reduce the number of amendments or changes. No, the whole history of our country is one in which the idea of popular sovereignty, where the people hold the power, and subsequently this is a manifestation of that. It's how it is used, and or perhaps abused. It does become an issue or a problem, and but you know, in a democracy, you have to take what may some see as bad with the good, right. And so you don't want to use just the outlanders, the exceptional or the ludicrous examples of pregnant pigs in cages to then throw out the idea that democracy, direct democracy, is not good.
Okay, and I think at that point we might want to just educate the public a little bit about how we came to be, why things are the way they are. So let's take a look at a bit of that history now.
On March 3rd, 1845, Florida became the 27th state of the Union. Fast forward 165 years, and the landscape looks a lot different. No longer a frontier society, Florida is now a metropolitan state of more than 18 million. In 1968, big change was underway. Population booming, tourism thriving, and our dynamic state needed a constitution to keep up with the culture. Seeing all that growth, planners called for a constitutional convention and put into place Florida's 6th Constitution. The Collins Center's Frank Alcock.
We were just starting to get the huge volumes of visitors down to the state of Florida, and so they knew that Florida would be changing. The Florida in 1968 would not be the Florida of '88 or 2008, and so they wanted to make the Constitution relatively easy to change. Not too easy, but easier than our federal Constitution.
One of the provisions of the Constitution of 1968 calls for direct democracy, whereby everyday citizens, meeting administrative guidelines and judicial approval, can get issues on the ballot.
If the citizens feel like, for whatever reason, the legislature is not responding to a broad concern that they have the option of not relying on the legislatures to legislate in a manner that they think would be the best for Floridians, and so they can put a ballot initiative, if they follow all the steps, they can get something on the Constitution.
Some complain that this leaves the Constitution subject to political whims or special interest groups that can exploit the process. And as Alcock explains, a voting public largely uninterested.
There is a level of complacency sometimes, so a greater motivation on the part of the people to become educated, informed, and to exercise not only their rights, but their duties and responsibilities as citizens. I'd like to see a broader segment of our state, as well as our national population, take that responsibility seriously. However, I think it's quite challenging these days. I mean, a lot has changed with respect to media, in that it's just not the world that your mom and dad or your grandpa and grandma lived in.
And no, it is a different world today, with 24-hour news, media, niche marketing really set up for every political perspective, and the internet with all kinds of viewpoints out there. Lydia, your organization, the League of Women Voters, does programs like this in order to try and educate the public. Do we need to have more of that so that voters are less confused and more informed? What do you think?
Well, I think it could start in maybe middle school with more civics classes. I mean, right now, you know, in Florida, it's mandated that they teach civics for a very short period in middle school, but not in high school. So these kids are graduating from school knowing absolutely zero, practically, about their government. I mean, if the ordinary person on the street doesn't know the 3 branches of government, you really have lost something. So how are they going to read these confusing amendment propositions and know how to vote.
Yeah, well, and with all of the noise that we were just talking about, there is plenty of it out there. Part of any democracy, like Dr. Bergerson was saying, is to get other people to kind of adopt to your viewpoint. The question I have then becomes, do you have then these special interest groups almost hijacking then the political process to get those social type issues like you were referring to, David, on the ballot? What do you think?
Sure. With any of these amendments right now, there are groups that are funding ads, that are funding polls. Amendment 4 is one of those. For example, you showed in this broadcast the thumbs down sign on one of the political signs, basically saying, no, all the claims that somehow it'll be a job killer. It's a very controversial amendment for sure, but those kinds of words are used basically to poison the debate. I think that's one thing that we really have to be cautious about. There are many media services such as PolitiFact.com, which many newspapers, including our own, has been using to show what's wrong, what are the real truths behind it, because right now in political season there's very little truth out there.
Very little.
It's so very interesting, and this is a good point, because in terms of the amendments, we wanted to know what you out there were feeling, to see if there was any confusion. And to see if in every election cycle you actually knew for sure what you were voting for. So let's have a listen to those results.
Usually before I vote, I get the ballot that they send in the mail and go over it. And then I kind of study it before I vote to see exactly what's going on. So I try to really pay attention to the amendments. But right now I haven't been focused on the amendments.
Do you have any idea what the amendments are that'll be before you if you vote in the November election?
Have absolutely no idea.
Have you ever been in a ballot box and guessed or left things blank because you didn't know?
Absolutely.
What do you think is the right thing people should do if they're not educated or informed?
Leave it blank. Yeah, because I don't believe in voting personally for something that I know nothing about.
I would like the newspaper to run them all, different pros, cons, what it's all about. Most people get the newspaper. I read the newspaper every day. Where else are you going to get your information?
Have you ever found yourself in a position where you did not know how you felt about it or weren't educated enough? And if so, what did you do then?
Yes, I mean, of course, I'm 47 now, and through the past, yeah, there was times where I wasn't informed, okay, or felt like I was informed, but I always felt like it's my patriotic duty to inform yourself. I mean, this is your right, a birthright. You need to exercise it.
And I just love what he says there. It's our patriotic duty, and we need to exercise it. Panelists, what do you think? What do you think of these comments? Anyone want to jump in, Dr. Bergerson?
Well, I think the idea of not being informed or not being exposed to the amendments is a very accurate picture of what's going on out there. And I think one of the reasons, and perhaps maybe a significant one, is that when you have major races, particularly for governor and senator, the amount of money that is being spent or has been spent, for instance, just on the governor's race, some estimates are going to be over $100 million. Well, there's only a certain amount of information, political information, that voters are able to absorb.
Right.
And so when you have the Senate, the governor, and others.
And then all these amendments.
Exactly.
Judges. Judges, mosquito control.
Mosquito. Hospital board, you know, the interest falls off. And then given the fact that some of these amendments, gee, where we're repealing an amendment to an amendment, you know, I'll just let it pass.
Democracy is messy, and you have to be prepared if you really take this seriously. I get a mail-in ballot myself, and I take time to consider these issues. Now, certainly as a journalist, it's part of my job to be prepared, but it's also a citizen's responsibility to do his or her homework. The information is plentiful on newspapers, websites, TV. In the League of Women Voters, for example, has numerous information. There's no excuse for not being able to get it. It's the question, are you willing to take those few hours, perhaps, to read and to educate yourself?
Or even a few minutes, really. Take that time. We do want to remind you that we are live, and the number to call if you're interested in asking any of our panelists a question or leaving a comment is 1-800-809-WGCU or 9428. You can send us a question via email at yourvoice@wgcu.org, or leave a question or comment on our Facebook page, WGCU Public Media, or send us a tweet. And this is the first tweet we've had. So the tweet comes from Ted, and this refers to Amendments 5 and 6, which we will get into here momentarily. He says yes on Amendments 5 and 6 because he'd like to block ploys to rig our elections. If people disagree, well, that's why we have courts. And as I'm reading these comments, Donald from Port Charlotte just is leaving a comment saying that he is in favor of smaller class sizes because of children with learning disabilities. And I think there has been some pretty strong research on that, saying that if you do have a learning disability, a child with one will do better within a smaller class size. Getting back to the comments I wanted to share with you when I was gathering those comments, a lot of times voters really are sitting in the ballot box and they would just maybe throw a dart. They'd have no idea, and they were admitting it to me, they had no idea which way they were going to vote, so they guessed. Lydia, what is that something we should be doing, is just guessing or leaving it blank?
No, I do not think that's a good idea. I think what you should do is you should go to your computer and go to the League of Women Voters.
Of course you do.
And, you know, there you have it. Everything is there for you. It's all nonpartisan. The information is there. And you can make up your mind based on nonpartisan information. Okay. You know,
and we have programs like this. That
and your programs like this. And you, all week long, there's been a program on the radio, on WGCU radio,
right,
on the amendments.
Go to the News Press.
Or go to the or the Naples Daily News, or there's lots of places to go.
Right, and I believe it was Monday, David, the News Press came out with its editorial board giving their positions and why. And I know the League of Women Voters for several months now has had their positions and giving both the pros and cons. So ultimately, it is up to you, the voter, to decide. I want to give you that number again because I'd love to hear more thoughts from you, as this is our interactive program. The number to call is 1-800-809-WGCU. Finally, Joni in Cape Coral just has a comment for us in referring to the class size amendment, the revision of that. She says she does not want to increase class size, but she'd like to eliminate busing because it is so expensive, and she'd like to see that money be put into the classroom. At this point, let's focus, pull it back a little bit on Amendments 1 and 2. Amendment 1 is a potential repeal of public campaign financing. Sponsored by the Florida Legislature, this amendment overturns, here's that flip-flopping again, 1998's original amendment that allows taxpayer financing of political campaigns. Dr. Pavelka, what's at stake here?
Well, at this point, the hands are definitely in the voters' hands to look at repealing what's currently on the books. And if it is repealed, then we're basically sending that back to the legislature to make a determination. And we're, as we've talked about, we have increasing spending, increasing expenditures in the voting process. We also have, in the election process, we also have candidates who are spending way too much money of their own money on elections and being able to get and acquire public funds. So this repeal would definitely, I think, be a substantive issue, and placing it back in the legislators' hands would be something that we would definitely have to act on in the future as well.
David, the News Press has voted, or the editorial board has adopted a position of yes on this issue, saying that campaign financing should not be a government function. How would you weigh in?
That's correct. It's a philosophical issue that we don't believe it's a government function. The state funds principally health and human services and education and many other services like the courts. This is not one of those things. People often call it welfare for politicians. That's perhaps a little bit inflammatory.
Sure.
But this is not the purpose of state government, in our opinion. As we saw with Barack Obama's campaign in 2008, look at all the micro donations that he received through the internet. So it doesn't mean you don't have to be rich to win. Kendrick Meek beat his opponent, Jeff Green, in the Democratic primary, and he was way underfunded and received a great majority.
Lydia, I have to bring you in here because the League of Women Voters takes the opposite position on this.
It certainly does. We really do believe in public financing of campaigns for some very good reasons. I mean, are you going to leave all of your political positions open just for the super rich, or just for the people who get funding from oil, pharmacy, you name all the big corporations who want a favor down the road? Are they going to write the checks if they don't get the favor after people are elected? I think it would, personally, I mean, this is not a league position, but I just don't understand why we don't put a cap on spending, shorten the amount of time that these campaigns last, and make everybody just obey the law, and that's that. They do it in England.
Amendment 2, as we move on to the next issue I'd like to talk about, is called the Homestead ad valorem tax credit for deployed military personnel. This provides an additional property tax exemption for servicemen and women deployed overseas the previous year. We're a little tight on time, but Dr. Bergerson, this is probably the least controversial of all the amendments. The only controversy is that because we're so economically challenged at the moment, do we need any tax breaks out there?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, this is a question of rewarding those individuals who are serving in a time of economic retraction, and many of these not veterans, but active military personnel have a difficulty. Their families are having difficulty. This is, frankly, a small way of trying to provide some reward for their service, and in particular for their families back here in Florida while their spouse is in active duty. So it's
Just
pretty
a little
non-controversial from my perspective. It is anyway. I would be surprised if this doesn't carry the most yes votes.
Okay. Amendment 3 was removed from the ballot, and that brings us to Amendment number 4, dubbed Hometown Democracy. Supporters argue it will stop Florida's nonsensical overbuilding, at least in the boom times. This is a citizen-initiated proposal fueled by big money on both sides that calls for voters to decide on the adoption and amendment of local government land use plans.
If Amendment 4 is approved, the public will have a say in big development issues that they don't have now.
Wayne Garcia is the communications director for Yes on 4, or the Florida Hometown Democracy Political Action Committee, a group spearheading the campaign to give citizens a vote on new growth, or any change to a local government's comprehensive land use plan or blueprint.
Anytime that somebody comes and wants to change that to build a big subdivision or a project of some kind, and we see them happening all the time in Florida before the recession, we add one more step. It goes through the government reviews like it does now, but the voters will get to vote at the end and say yes or no.
Yes to 4.
Garcia's group has been staging rallies like this one, urging public support, which Yes on 4 argues would give voters a seat at the table of land use decisions. Organizers believe that seat is currently reserved for developers, lobbyists, and special interests.
Really at its heart, it's people to have their own say. Because there are communities that might want to have more of those kind of subdivisions or retail centers or malls and things, and there are communities that don't want to have it. And the communities that don't want to have it shouldn't be forced to have it because of the influence of development money that flows into the political system.
Amendment 4 supporters believe local officials have proven themselves incapable of placing public interest before big business or real estate developers, and it's led to a glut of overbuilt and often empty condos and homes and commercial space.
This just adds one more thing that voters have a responsibility for, and they want that responsibility. They want to have a say before their taxes are raised, because a lot of these new developments don't pay for themselves.
But naysayers couldn't disagree more. Many say Amendment 4 could lead to big problems. People like private land planner Alexis Crespo, who believes expensive court battles will result. Sarcastically dubbed the Vote on Everything Amendment, Crespo believes it requires voter approval on just too much.
I know that proponents say this will be limited to land use, because really land use is at the heart of this new development, people not wanting new development. You're voting on changes and expansion of public facilities, improvements to roadways, water sewage, everything's wrapped up in this. It just covers every single facet of our life. It is absolutely voting on every single change for the long-range plan for your community.
Alexis says the representatives we elect should decide these changes, which are often very complicated, and that can take city council members or county commissioners days or weeks to digest. She feels misunderstandings and limited ballot language could result in voter confusion.
Our Board of County Commissioners and City Council spend a great deal of time researching and understanding these really complex amendments that really range in size from hundreds to thousands of pages of data.
She says overwhelmed voters and long and involved ballots would lead to job loss, and growth in this economic downturn would be all but stopped.
My personal opinion is we're in a recession at this time, and I think any change to our Constitution that would potentially decrease job creation, create more burden on our local governments is not a good decision to make, whether it's $1 billion or $20,000, not a good decision for the state of Florida.
Amendment 4 opponents include the Chamber of Commerce, the Florida Association of Realtors, Community Farm Bureaus, and land planners, of course. Again, its supporters include its sponsor, the Florida Hometown Democracy Political Action Committee, founded by Leslie Blackner, a Palm Beach attorney. So, David, is this smart growth to end sprawl, or just big expense and really too much voter input that would lead ultimately to confusion?
I understand the reason for this. I met with Ms. Blackner and also with opponents of Amendment 4 a couple months ago. And the reality is it's a reaction. We saw the boom times, we saw the overdevelopment, and then we saw the economy, how hard it hit us, how hard this recession hit us, the empty vacant lots, downtown condos that are not being filled, for example. But citizens are involved in this process. Citizens from Bayshore all the way to other areas of Lee County, for example, are creating their own community plans, and there is a process where people can become educated, and obviously the final approval comes from the county commissioners and city councilors because they receive the most information, they understand the big picture, and they're not just looking at individual land use changes, which a voter might be tempted to do. We saw that people's attitudes for the amendments are vote blank when you don't know.
Right. That's my fear in all of this, because in today's busy world and in people's busy lives, are they going to take the time actually to decide both of these issues?
I think there's also a philosophical issue here of what are we electing city councils and county commissioners for? What kind of decisions, particularly technical decisions? Here's a good example of what we talked about earlier about the complicated nature of the language and what does the language mean, and is it going to be just massive changes, comprehensive, or individual changes? And so if this passes, there's going to be litigation regarding this, I think, this amendment.
And it may be costly as well. I do want to remind you that this is a live program, and we invite you to take part in the program in this Your Voice broadcast. The number is 1-800-809-WGCU. Judy sent us an email, and this refers to Amendment number 4, and she comments that Amendment 4 will not solve all of Florida's inappropriate development issues, but says it is a step in the right direction. We're going to talk more about this in a moment, but I do want to talk about Amendments 5 and 6. These ones deal with redistricting. A group calling themselves Fair Districts Florida sponsored this citizens initiative calling for legislative number 5 or congressional Amendment number 6 districting plans not to be drawn in favor of an incumbent or political party. The issue here is gerrymandering, and we spoke with the amendment's originator at Lydia's organization's public forum, and we present to you both sides.
When redistricting gets done in Florida, the legislators go into back rooms and they cut deals to draw districts that are favorable to themselves. They essentially rig the districts to accomplish a particular political purpose, either to protect an incumbent or to protect a political party.
I oppose them because, one, the amendments cannot be implicated without forcing all the issues into a court. Follow the intent, follow the money, and what is the outcome? The intent is not fair districts. The intent is a more liberal Congress and legislature.
So Lydia, as I mentioned, your organization, the Collier County League of Women Voters, sponsored that forum, and the statewide organization takes a position on this issue. Talk to us a little bit about it.
It takes a very strong position. The League of Women Voters has been working on redistricting reform since 1982. We've gone through Republican administrations and Democratic administrations because if you look at the map of districts, it's insane. We have districts that go across Alligator Alley. We have districts that go across the water. I mean, that's not contiguous. What are you going across the water? And all we're asking is that rules, 5 and 6 just creates rules that the legislators have to use when they're drawing new districts, and that, you know, they should be geographically whole if possible. They shouldn't go from Broward to Collier. That's an awfully large district. So we are very much in favor of these districts. We worked on them very hard. We collected an awful lot of signatures to get them on the ballot in the first place. And can all of those Floridians who signed all those petitions be wrong?
Yeah. Well, does anyone have an opposing viewpoint to that as well? Because the argument is that politicians want to keep their jobs, so that is why they set these election boundaries the way they are. Dr. Pavelka.
I think there's a lot of potential for legal action in this regard. I also think there's a lot of questions with regard to the definitions of the terms within this amendment. And while we think they're very simplistic, when we look at, for example, favoring or disfavoring an incumbent or political party, or denying racial or language minorities, and the contingency issue, people have said, well, one district, Broward and Collier, they have, that is their district, and the representative, actually, who is the representative now, he works very hard to deal with both coasts, as well as the representative, the state senator, who had 27.
But there are always going to be law cases about redistricting. There's never been a redistricting with that.
And they end up in court anyway.
Two issues that have been brought up. One is that Republicans, who are currently in the majority, said they use the Democratic-controlled, or the Democratic plan to win that majority. So certainly it doesn't necessarily disfavor or favor a party now. It's who the voters want. The second concern has been about minority representation. Mario Diaz-Balart, who's a congressman who actually drew himself a seat going from Collier all the way to Hialeah, has been opposed to this initiative, as has Democratic Congressman Corinne Brown, who's African-American, and says that essentially we would lose representation in the legislature and in Congress of minority representatives if we change those maps.
But the NAACP doesn't agree with her.
They don't agree.
There's a rule of thumb in the process of redistricting, and that is save your seat before you try to save the world.
Very interesting.
Good for you.
Subsequently, these boundaries are going to take these odd shapes that are going to produce safe seats for the party in power. That has taken place ever since Eldridge Gary started this in 1790, and I hope that, I guess that these pass, because they do present a good government ideal. In reality, you're still going to have gerrymandering.
Probably.
I want to remind you, the viewer, that this great lively debate is your chance to actually give your questions or comments to anybody on this panel. Let's just take a quick one now. We heard from Earl in Naples. He has a question for the panelists that I'd like to answer briefly. He asks, what criteria do the panel members feel should be used to determine what goes into the Constitution, or should it be legislated by other means?
That's a very good question, and actually the League of Women Voters does have a position on that. And what we want is for someone to make that decision.
Interesting.
Decide what should really go into the Constitution and what should be a statutory initiative. We haven't talked about statutory initiatives tonight. Our Constitution doesn't even allow for them, but they should be there.
Right, but the beauty of the Constitution itself is that it is a living document.
Right. And what is clear is that the amendment certainly can leave a living legacy on how governments do business or even change a way of life. I want to take a look back. 15 years ago, a controversial amendment called the net ban barred a type of fishing net from inshore Gulf and Atlantic waters. Caused plenty of controversy back then, so let's see where we stand 15 years later.
Roy Kibbe is helping one of his longtime customers purchase fresh steamed Gulf crabs.
I sell him live crabs is what I primarily do. He gets orders for some cooked crabs, so I cook his crabs for him.
And this year, the crab season's been a blessing.
I've always blue crab my entire life. Since I've been in the state of Florida, when my family moved down from Ohio, we went into the blue crab business, and I've always done blue crabs. So when things get real rough, I go back blue crabbing.
The plentiful crabs are a bit of a silver lining for Kibbe, who's endured a clamming business decimated by hurricanes and red tide, and a commercial fishing business all but shut down because of the net ban.
15 years ago, we were up and running, we were growing. Just prior to us going into the clam business, things were going quite well. We're getting plenty of fish, price of roe fish was up, and 15 years later, it's just the opposite. We're struggling to even stay in existence, let alone in business. It is a struggle. And every fish company I know is like that.
Voters banned the gill nets by approving a 1994 constitutional amendment sponsored by the Save Our Sea Life campaign, a citizens' initiative that went into effect July 1, 1995. Net ban supporters like retired marine biologist and former marine fisheries chair Dr. Tom Fraser says the nets allowed fishermen to catch too many fish, depleting populations like redfish, spotted sea trout, and pompano.
The main fish that probably benefited from taking nets out of the water was our black mullet or striped mullet. It was one of the main impetuses for the amendment because it's a food fish for not only humans, but it's a major food fish for lots of species of other fish and for ospreys.
Critics argue the nets hurt sea life and the environment, and that overfished waters affect tourism and sports fishing. Commercial guys like Kibbe and his friend James Driggers disagree, saying they'd never take too much from the sea. Their livelihood depends on it.
We're not out there to catch every last fish. We can't do that. This is our livelihood. We have to make sure that next year we can pay our bills, you know. And it's not like we're going to go out and take every fish there is, and then what do we do?
It put me out of business as far as commercial fishing goes. I'm my age, you know, and what they allow you to work with is absolutely ridiculous. I can't do it anymore.
Today's approved net has holes less than 2 inches. Kibbe says these smaller nets have the unintended consequence of capturing and killing too many juvenile fish. Plus, hauling the nets is back-breaking, fruitless work.
They go out about every night to catch fish, and he'll catch 10,000 pinfish, 2,000 catfish, and 50 mullet. Then you spend 3 or 4 hours clearing out all these baby fish to keep $5 worth of marketable fish.
Kibbe says the ban virtually shut down Pine Island's proud history of commercial fishing.
They had probably 8 or 9 different big other companies that were coming in from other states and stuff and buying their fish, you know, in tractor trailers, you know. They're doing quite well. Then after the net ban, it kind of dwindled down to nothing because they couldn't get the volumes of fish anymore because it limited how many fish we could catch. And it just slowly went out of existence.
A sad fact of life for many like Daryl Russell, who used to work for Kibbe and now cuts grass just to make a living.
Worked for Roy for years, running the big barge, doing the farm-raised clams, then worked at the dock, packing fish, and there just ain't much of that anymore, and Roy didn't need no help anymore, so I had to find something else to do.
It's kind of disheartening, you know, to know that you've done this your whole life, and you can't bring your family up in it anymore. What do you do, you know? It's disheartening. It really is.
On the flip side, net ban supporters like Fraser argued that with Florida's population booming, fish stocks would have been severely damaged today if not for the ban, and that only the future will determine its measure of ultimate success.
The amendment is what it is. I think by and large, it succeeded in reducing fishing mortality, which allows more fish to survive, and at least for our tourist industry and our recreational and charter industry, allowed for a shift in the economics, if you will, from primarily commercial effort to tourist, recreational, and charter fishing.
I'd like to take this time as the show comes to a close to read this comment from Ted from Pine Island. It's about Amendment number 4. He says, we live in a republic, not a democracy, and we elect people to make decisions for us, particularly as it applies to Amendment number 4 issues. Kind of, this is the hometown democracy issue. Anyone want to kind of make a comment on that comment?
I would agree with Ted, and the issues related to land use planning are very technical, they're very complicated, and they have long-term consequences. Not that I'm opposed to a direct democracy by any means, but I think this is an issue that elected representatives should make, and it should not be in the Constitution.
We have another comment, Dr. Bergerson. This one is in opposition to your comments as well, and Ted's. John from LaBelle, and I want to get this out. Regarding Amendment 4, why not try it? He says, because it can't be worse than we have now. Charles from Fort Myers thinks that the ballot language is just so impossible to understand. People don't vote on the amendments. We're less than maybe 30 seconds left in the show, but David, are you hearing that from people reading your newspaper?
I am. It's turning people off, and Lydia made a comment during our break there that it should be written at a 5th grade level, and that's true. At this moment, it really is beyond most people's level of patience, for example, and we really don't know what the fiscal impact is. We think we know, but ultimately we won't know until we see the implementation of it.
Oh, it's so very interesting, and we do thank you. A very special thank you goes out to all of you sharing your thoughts and insights with us, and it's been our job and our hope to try and educate you, our viewers, as much as possible. A special thank you goes out to our phone bank volunteers from the Collier County League of Women Voters for taking these wonderful comments and calls from you. Lydia's clapping over here. It is always our mission to have your voice heard, so join us next time. We'll examine the future of education. A lot of talk there. I'm Rochelle Grossman. Have a good night.